we have Professor M.A. Muqtedar Khan, who is an Indian American academic and a professor in Department of Political Science and International Relations at University of Delaware in US. Khan is the founding director of Islamic Studies program at the university. He chaired the Department of Political Science and was director of International Studies at Adrian College. He was a senior non-resident fellow at Brookings Institution from 2003 to 2008. He was senior fellow of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding from 2011 to 2014 and is a senior fellow of the Center for Global Policy since 2014. He earned his PhD in International Relations, Political Philosophy, and Islamic Political Thought from Georgetown University in May 2000. So your homework is to figure out all these universities and where they are in US. So, apart from that, Professor Khan has also this very viral podcast called as Khanversations, which is very important. So, sir, we are very, very thankful for your presence and very privileged that you could spend time with our community today. And with this, the floor is all yours and you can start.
Thank you very much, Shubhda, and I'm absolutely delighted, and it's also my honor to speak to people. I had traveled to India recently, that is in January. I spent about a month there after more than 20 years. And I spoke at several universities. So it was very nice reconnecting with Indians. So when I left India, we would either be an engineer or a doctor, but it was nice to see that a lot of people were taking part in studying social studies and also pursuing actually PhDs in social sciences. So that was to me quite delightful. I made lots of friends. So I'm trying to now share my PowerPoint and so I started preparing for this talk yesterday, and when I looked at the title you had suggested, Impact of US Elections on Middle East Policy, I got a little confused as to what is it that we are talking about. And so is it impact of the election itself or the impact of the election outcome on? So I thought, well, why not do both? So these are the two chances. So if you look at the independent variables, either it's the election or the election's outcome, and the dependent variable is the policy. So yes, I think, in fact, I had never thought of it that way, that the elections would have a certain kind of an impact on policy, and election outcome would have another impact on the policy itself. The reason why this has become so critical is because of the ongoing Gaza war and that crisis. So which means that every day the President and Secretary of State are compelled to make policy decisions. So for example, they're not making policy decisions about Brazil every day, but they are making about the Middle East, whether to send aircraft carriers or not, which fighters to shoot, should we shoot at the Iranians or not. So there are policy decisions being made every day while there is an election going on. So I think this is one of those rare moments where you can actually look at the impact of elections on policy as well as potential elections outcomes on policy. And then with regards to the outcomes, we have two potential outcomes. If Didi wins, what happens? And if Donald wins, what happens? So these are the four things that I'm going to talk to you all about. I will talk to you about the impact of but when we look at the elections and policy, the vectors can be both ways. The policy is also having impact on elections, and elections are also having an impact on policy. So I want the students to get the map in their mind. I'm going to be talking about the impact of elections on policy, elections outcomes on policy, and then I will also look at the policy's impact on elections impact on policy, and then try and speculate about the two outcomes that we have. What will be the impact if Kamala Harris wins, and what can be the potential impact if Donald Trump wins? So, so since I'm not using the slide, anyway, so on the left side that you see are the policy on elections. So one of the things that has happened as a direct result of the Middle East policy is Biden is out. Not only is Biden out, but he's disgraced and he's humiliated, while strong supporters of Joe Biden will argue that he is the greatest president we have had in a long time and he did this wonderful things. But basically, Biden has spent the last 2 years fighting two wars, one in Ukraine and the other in Gaza. And all his agenda of, if you remember, bringing diplomacy back, making human rights the center of American foreign policy, all of that went out of the window. In fact, Biden has, in my opinion, done a far great damage to American interests abroad than any recent president, because the rule-based order that we talk about so much, those rules have been violated by the US itself. So, for example, in the case of the war in Ukraine, Biden basically has weaponized the international system, for example, using SWIFT to go after Russia. Now, that has prompted many countries to find alternate ways of doing business because they feel that if they ever run afoul with any Western country, then the United States will punish them for being part of an international system. So, the weaponization of the international system to defend Ukraine and the destruction of international norms and values to defend Israel is Biden's contribution to foreign affairs. And to the extent that there was only once that the United States allowed a Security Council resolution to pass in the UN, that was to pressure Israel to call for a ceasefire. And then immediately the State Department went about trying to say that Security Council resolution, that one was not mandatory. So in that sense, the United States under Biden was undermining. But what all of this has led to do is that America is changing. So a segment of the American population composed of young people below the age of 30, Muslims and Arabs. In the United States, we talk about Muslims and Arabs separately because a large number of Arabs in the United States, especially in Michigan, are Christians. So when we say Arabs, we are talking about Arab Christians. And then when we talk about Muslims, we are also including the Arab Muslims as part of Muslims. So they are two different political forces. On this issue, they have all come together. So young people, Muslims, Arabs, and progressives, which means the far left segment of the Democratic Party, all of these four forces came together and they broke from Biden. And it was very clear that some of them became what we call as no to Biden, no to Donald Trump, both of them. And so we see the resurgence of third candidates. And the constant fear is that you have to understand that in the United States, the elections are very peculiar. So the United States, when you're running for president, you don't have to win the majority vote. What you have to do is you have to win what is called as the electoral college, which means some states are more important than others. So if there was only one path for Joe Biden to become president of the United States, which was to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, he had to win these three states. But because the constituency, which was so upset with his genocidal war in Gaza, that it was very clear that he would lose Pennsylvania, definitely Michigan. He had to win Michigan, and he would lose Michigan. And so during the primaries, he won about 14 million votes, whereas you could see that those who were, they decided to use the word uncommitted. So the uncommitted vote was pretty high, more than 500,000 votes. And in primary, very few people vote. So the fear was that Biden would lose. And so one consequence of Joe Biden's own policy, see, this is the only American president who repeatedly says that he's a Zionist. So Joe Biden's Zionist policies basically ended his career as a politician. And so the bigwigs in the political party, Barack Obama, as well as especially Nancy Pelosi, forced Joe Biden out of this. It hasn't happened in more than 50 years that a sitting incumbent president who has already won the primaries was forced out, primarily because his policies would have led to a defeat not of only of the presidential candidate, but the fear was that Democrats would get wiped out. So one big consequence of Joe Biden's policy on elections was the end of his political career. The second is that it divided. It divided the Americans, it divided the Democrats. The Democrats are significantly divided now. Older Democrats are very pro Israel, younger Democrats are very, very critical of Israel. The bipartisan consensus on Israel has been broken. Which means that since the United States Middle East policy is centered around Israel, it's all about Israel, it's about protecting Israel, it's about protecting Israel's territory, Israel's political ambitions, about protecting even Israel's occupation of West Bank and Gaza. With billions of dollars and weapons. So if US policy towards Israel is impacted, it also impacts US policy towards the entire and rest of the Middle East. So now, for the first time, there is a significant cleavage in American thinking about the Middle East. So, for example, more than 50% of Democrats think that the war in Gaza is genocidal. Whereas I think a vast majority of Republicans think that he hasn't killed enough people. Come on, he just killed only 40,000 people and only 20,000 children. By now, he should have killed more, I guess. But so there is this division, which is a significant impact, and it will continue going into the future. That from now on, I don't think it will be easy to reconstruct a consensus around Israel policy unless there is some significant changes on the ground in the Middle East. I don't want to go too much outside the United States, but the US policy, which is so overbearing that one of the things that US does with its allies is eliminates the strategic autonomy of its allies. So the other day I was telling, when I was talking about India-US relations, that the US is a great boyfriend but a terrible husband. So when you date the US, they will do wonderful things. They will give you engines for jet fighters, and they will give you intelligence, and they'll give you clothes for your soldiers to fight on the borders in Himalayas. But once you get married, then they will bully the shit out of you. And so Europeans have very little option to have a different policy from the US when it comes to the Middle East. And so countries like France and Britain basically pursue, and Germany, whatever the US does. But you could see the impact of the Gaza policy on the elections in France as well as Britain. So you have the far left, which became the number one constituency in France. They said that if they came into power, which Macron is preventing them from coming into power, that they would recognize the Palestinian state instantly. And you can see the difference in Starmer's policies in Britain towards Israel. They have reduced some licenses. They have also refused to defend Netanyahu in the International Criminal Court. So the policies are changing, and primarily because of the elections in Europe. The Biden policy in the Middle East has also divided European Union to some extent. So you have countries like Norway, divided Europe. You have countries like Spain, Norway, and Ireland recognizing the Palestinian state, whereas countries like France refusing to do so. So you can see that there is an impact. So this whole talk that Joe Biden has united allies, etc., he may have done so in the case of Ukraine, but he has divided them with his basically fanatical support of Netanyahu and everything that Bibi Netanyahu does. One of the consequences of the policy in the Middle East has that America has become an illiberal state. Increasingly, it has become a genocide enabler. Everybody can see what is happening in Gaza, but look at Blinken. You can see, just look at Blinken's videos 2 years before this war in Gaza started and now. The man's soul is shriveling away. He knows he's lying. He knows he's being hypocritical when he goes around defending Israel. Not only that, we are shutting down freedom of speech in universities. We are destroying academic freedom. People are afraid to talk about US policies in the Middle East. It's like living under the Taliban. And then what do you do on the class? Islamic rights for women. You want to give a lecture like that in Kabul tomorrow with the Taliban in charge? Obviously not. I will call in sick that day because you probably will be killed by the Taliban. In the US, they may not kill you, but your careers can be destroyed. So academics are afraid to speak in the classrooms. University presidents have lost their jobs at MIT, at UPenn, at Columbia, at Harvard. In fact, Harvard's ranking last year, its world ranking was number 1. It is number 11 now. And the destruction is coming not from any internal problems, coming from the pro-Israeli forces. We are trying to silence the universities and students. America is becoming an illiberal state. My son is a graduate student. He went to Harvard, but he chose to go to Caltech for his PhD and not to Harvard. And now he was telling me, see, I told you, look at the rankings drop. By the time Israel finishes Gaza off, the Biden administration will finish Harvard off. If there are protests in the fall in Columbia and other universities, I think the pro-Israeli lobby will destroy American universities to protect Israel. It's not just about protecting Israel, but also Israel's reputation, to justify everything violent that Israel does as justifiable. I mean, this is the first time in history where self-defense includes genocide. And this is the moral corruption of American foreign policy. So this whole talk that this is a city on the hill, a force for the good, I'm not very sure whether we can continue to say that about US foreign policy. Now let's look at the election impact on the policy itself. So one of the simplest examples is that when Netanyahu was visiting the United States, he met Donald Trump. And there are reports in the media that Trump told him not to bring about the ceasefire until the election results are over, which means that Trump, if he wins on November 5th, he will make a phone call and Netanyahu will agree for a ceasefire. Thereby, Donald Trump takes credit for it and not the Democrats. So that's cynical, this whole idea. So there is a perception that the ceasefire is being delayed because, one, we have a lame duck president, and Joe Biden is not going to be president in February, and Netanyahu feels that he can abuse Biden as much as he wants and get away with it, especially if they are betting that Trump is going to win. For example, for those of you who study Indian foreign policy, there were lots of articles in Indian newspapers, including, I think, Suhasini Haidar, who was arguing that Narendra Modi's trip to Moscow was betting on two things. One, that Russia is winning the war, and the other is Donald Trump is winning the elections in the US. So countries countries calibrate their foreign policies on these bets. So for example, if MBS is looking at the election, then he thinks that Donald Trump will win, then he will adopt a different posture towards the current administration. But if he thinks that Kamala Harris will win, then he will be more conciliatory towards the US current administration. So the elections also does have not only an impact on American policy, but also on the policy of other nations towards America. For example, this has nothing to do with the Middle East, but one of the things that Joe Biden is trying to do is to make sure that he can send billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine in a fashion in which even if Trump wins, the money can go. And so a lot of money was sent early on before the elections. So if you remember the $60 billion bill that was passed in the House and the Senate, that was basically to bulletproof or Trump-proof American aid for Ukraine, because Trump has promised to cut all aid to Ukraine as soon as he becomes president. And as I already argued, one of the things that has happened is the election has, I think, to a great extent, destroyed, and if not destroyed, definitely weakened the bipartisan consensus towards Israel as well as the Middle East. For example, the Democrats are determined not to have a war with Iran, but the Republicans are spoiling for a war with Iran in the Middle East. So you have nuts like Lindsey Graham saying, why can't we attack Iran? Every day, all he can talk about when he's on television is we need to punish Iran because Houthis, as well as Hezbollah, as well as Hamas, are Iranian proxies. The United States is not interested in an outright, all-out war with Iran because the US can do a lot of damage, say, in a week. But then if the war becomes protracted, one of the lessons of the 21st century, I hope that American policymakers recognize this, and I've hammered that point repeatedly, is that military power is becoming increasingly useless. So it is not easy to translate military power into political outcomes. So the United States spent trillions of dollars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And believe me, Bin Laden would eventually have died. He's not an immortal. So if just killing Bin Laden is an achievement for $2 trillion spent in Afghanistan, then it is very sad. 20 years in Afghanistan, and guess what? Afghanistan in 2024 looks exactly like Afghanistan when the Taliban took over in 2000. So what did the US achieve politically in Afghanistan? Nothing. And similarly in Iraq, the United States. So it's very difficult to translate military power into instantaneous political outcomes. So going to war with Iran does not necessarily guarantee that the US will get the political outcome it wants. Plus, even if the Iranians cannot retaliate against the United States, they will retaliate against US allies in the region, destabilize the economy. I mean, they would burn down the oil fields of Saudi Arabia for sure. The Houthis have completely terrorized the whole region with its attacks on ships. Even now, I mean, as we speak, in the last 1 week, I think they have attacked 2 ships. They have sunk 1 ship. They're causing environmental disasters. And the United States is unable to do this. I mean, US, Britain, even the Indian Navy. Remember, there was a lot of talk about the Indian Navy in the region. I don't know what they have done since rescuing one of those. They captured some pirates. They did one operation which got lots of media attention a few months ago. So there's Russian Navy, there's Chinese Navy, but especially the allies of the United States are there, but the Houthis continue to attack. So it's not very easy to get the desired outcomes that you like. Finally, I think going forward, US relations with Israel will never be the same as they were before October 7th. So these are some of the 2 vectors of the impact of elections on policy and the impact of policy on elections. And I want to now look at the potential of election outcomes on policy. So what happens if Kamala wins and what happens if Trump wins? So those are the 2 options that are available to us. So first of all, there's a huge difference between Kamala and Biden. Biden is a zealot. He's a fanatic. He's a religious fanatic. Remember, Joe Biden did not say that my support for Medicare is ironclad. There's nothing that Biden supports in an ironclad fashion except the security of Israel. So that is non-negotiable for Biden. He's willing to sacrifice everything: education of Americans, safety of Americans, security of Americans, He does not have an ironclad commitment to anything that is American. The only thing that he has an ironclad commitment is to Israel. And he proved it repeatedly by telling us he's a Zionist, on many occasions in the last 4 months. All his threats and demands for ceasefire were never backed with any leverage that the United States has over Israel. On top of that, he kept sending billions and billions of dollars. I even lost count. There was a $17 billion bill that was passed by the House. Then subsequently, recently, he sent another $28 billion Sometimes those numbers are rigged to make them look more than what they really are. But nevertheless, we have continued to supply thousands and thousands of pounds versus bombs. Even uh, even bombs with Nikki Haley's autograph. Wonder how many children were killed with bombs signed by Nikki Haley. So we have been supporting this under Biden. I'm not sure that Kamala Harris, she might do, she might support Israel for political reasons, but she's not a zealot like Biden. And that was demonstrated when she chose Walz as her running mate rather than Shapiro. Shapiro is the governor of Pennsylvania. Walz is the governor of Minnesota. Minnesota, Biden would, in my view, Biden would have lost Minnesota also because Minnesota is the state where Ilhan Omar comes from. There's very solid support for Palestine there. Uh, they were, she was not the only congresswoman from Minnesota who was very strong supporter of Palestine. There are other Senate, Congress people from Minnesota who were also strong supporters of Palestinian rights. So, but Biden, in order to, the pathway, like I said, for Biden to presidency was to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin for sure. And Shapiro, as governor of Pennsylvania, has a very high approval rating and very popular. I think his approval ratings are over 68% in Pennsylvania. So the conventional wisdom was if Kamala Harris picked Shapiro as her running mate, then she would definitely win Pennsylvania because he would bring Pennsylvania. But Shapiro is made a lot of very nasty comments about Palestinians when he was a younger person. And so he is seen as very, very pro-Israel. And as a result of that, I think the Kamala Harris team decided that we may win Pennsylvania, but if we have Shapiro, we'll definitely lose Michigan and probably Minnesota and probably Wisconsin. So she dropped him. I can guarantee you Biden would not have done that. So you can already see how they are different in some ways. One thing that you must realize is that for decades and decades and decades, there has been no two views on the Middle East. So if you go back and read an article I wrote when Joe Biden won the elections, I said there would be very little change in Biden's foreign policy towards the Middle East. So for example, Trump did the Abrahamic Accords, Biden strengthened it. Trump changed pivot to Asia, Biden's pivot to Asia to Indo-Pacific strategy. Biden strengthened it. So Biden basically consolidated Donald Trump's foreign policy in the Middle East as well as South Asia. So this argument that they are poles apart is not true. Remember when Biden was running for office, people kept saying that he's moderate, he's the moderate, right? And I kept asking myself, what is he a moderate? And then it hit me, he's a moderate Trump when it comes to foreign policy. Joe Biden is the most, of the 16 people who ran for the primaries in the Democratic election in 2020, Joe Biden was the closest to Donald Trump when it came to foreign policy. Don't forget that. So any variance from Biden, so for example, it's Republicans who support Biden's Israel policy and in the Middle East policy right now, not Democrats. More than 50% of Democrats are opposed to him. His approval ratings were, the only person whose approval ratings were worse than Joe Biden is Rishi Sunak, who had the worst in human history, the worst in British history, the worst loss in British history. Remember that Mr. Rishi Sunak was the worst prime minister the British have had in a long time. And only he was worse than Biden when it comes to approval ratings and views of the country's direction and foreign policy. I think overall, if Kamala Harris wins, there will be an appearance that there is no change in policy. So, for example, I'm participating in the debates of those who are still uncommitted voters. And many of them are unable to see the difference between Kamala Harris and and Joe Biden when it comes to Israel, except that Biden never spoke with credibility about the suffering of the Palestinians. But when Kamala Harris speaks, it does appear to be more authentic than Biden. So I have a feeling that I think the Biden administration goes far and beyond the call of duty to protect Israel and Netanyahu and what Israel is doing. They even anticipate what he's trying to do and they go out there to defend him. For example, the citation that he killed, I mean, in West Bank, an American was killed, and there you can see how the State Department people are twisting their petticoats in knots in trying to justify that, trying to say, yes, is what Israel did is not wrong. But so they are trying to say, they're struggling to find a way to not demonize or criticize Israel for killing an American. You won't see that happen under Kamala Harris. She's not going to pack the State Department with pro-Israeli people. There won't be that many pro-Israeli people as under Joe Biden. Even under Joe Biden, nearly 500 people in the State Department rebelled against his policies. Many quit. Josh Paul, Google him and see. He was the first to say because he argues that Joe Biden is violating American laws in supporting Israel. I don't think that Kamala Harris will go that far. She will do enough that the pro-Israeli billionaires and the pro-Israeli voters don't abandon her for the second term. But she will not put her future on line for Israel the way Joe Biden did. That's my perception. I'm going to be voting for her. I'm advocating for her. On my show, I argued that Joe Biden divided the Democrats and demoralized the Democrats, whereas Kamala Harris has united the Democrats and mobilized. The enthusiasm is stunning. She raised over $500 million in 1 month. But not just that, the money came from small-time donors. So many people donated to Kamala Harris, happy and thrilled and relieved that Joe Biden, was not going to be the president. Can you imagine the country like sigh of relief, Sala Buddha Gaya finally, and then give $500 million to Kamala Harris out of joy. This whole joy is coming because Biden is not the presidential candidate of the Democratic Party. And I think in the first week itself, over 170,000 people signed up to volunteer for her campaign. So there's tremendous enthusiasm because it's not Biden. The staffing will be different. I think there will be more Obama people in the administration than Biden people, which means the policy discussions will be slightly different. It's not that Obama was very different. On his way out, he gave $30 billion to Israel, but Obama did try to make peace with Iran. So in that sense, you could argue that Kamala Harris policies will be more like Obama's than Joe Biden's. But unlike Biden, she will be more focused on domestic policy because there are lots of domestic issues. See, if Biden was president in 2025, that would have been his last term. Whereas this will be the first term for Kamala Harris. So she's also thinking of elections further down the line, right, in 2028. So she is going to address the core weaknesses of the Biden policy, which is inflation, economy, etc. So I think Kamala Harris' focus will be more on domestic politics than foreign policy. Every now and then we see Biden move 2 aircraft carriers to protect Israel, 5 aircraft carriers, 4 aircraft, 20 F-22s. Every day he's like sending troops out there to defend. American generals were plotting, were part of some of the initial strategies for invasion of Gaza and so on and so forth. But I don't think under Kamala Harris, the entire US military will not be, I think, available to Israel to that extent as it is under Biden. Uh, Biden has an inner neocon in him, so he did nothing for the two-state solution in his 4 years. Absolutely nothing. He was trying to push for the Abrahamic Accords, which sidesteps the two-state solution. I think Kamala Harris also might not do anything, but she will keep talking about the two-state solution more than Biden did. If Trump wins, if Trump wins, America will be damaged in a much, much serious way. America will cease to be as effective worldwide because he's going to do a lot of horrible things to Americans to begin with. I think the Gaza war will end, but there will be a lot of brutality before it ends. So Trump will probably give Netanyahu a month to kill as many people as he can, do as much destruction as he can, and then he'll say, now stop, see, I ended the war. Hostilities towards Iran will increase. Trump will not start a war, but he will do lots of things quite short of war. So Iranians should be praying that Kamala Harris wins and not Donald Trump. He will put more pressure on Saudi Arabia to basically bend to Israel and push for the Abrahamic Accords. If you notice MBS, if you notice in the couple of months before October 7, there was all this talk about the Abrahamic Saudi Arabia is about to recognize Israel. I think one of the motivations for what Hamas did on October 7th was genuinely horrible, inhumane, terrorist attack, civilians. They chose to kill civilians. Once, for some reason, the Israeli security failed and gave them 6-7 hours inside Israel. They could have used that to hit military targets and political targets, but they chose to target civilians, even children who were attending a music festival. But that attack by Hamas was to prevent the Abrahamic Accords. You must understand that the two wars that are going on are two wars which are resisting expansion. The war in Gaza is resisting the expansion of the Abrahamic Accords, which completely undermines the Palestinian state rights. And the war in Ukraine is also a resistance to the expansion of NATO, and both of these have happened under Joe Biden. His expansionism have triggered these two wars. But Trump, because the Abrahamic Accord is his signature policy, he's going to try and pressure Saudi Arabia to basically bring about the Abrahamic Accord. There will be a lot of symbolic nastiness. See, Trump really did nothing significant domestically while he was president. He just damaged a few things, including the State Department, but did not really do anything significant. So there will be a lot of symbolicness. Even his "I will ban Muslims" was a symbolic gesture, which was so completely reduced by the Supreme Court that he basically made it very difficult for people from 5 countries to get visas, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, which was already the case. So he's going to do something symbolically nasty. And I think one of them would be expelling foreign students from American universities. I don't know how many of your students remember there is a JNU slogan which says, "Leke rahenge azadi, cheen ke rahenge azadi." This is the pro-Kashmir slogans, which were used at Columbia University. So there are videos of Indian graduate students who came from potentially, I think, from JNU to Columbia. He's going to target students like that, international students who have been working, because he's promising that I will deport all Hamas supporters, etc., which he cannot do without completely destroying American legal system. So he can't deport American citizens, he can't deport progressives, Marxists, and many of them are Jewish students themselves who are pro-Palestine and who are critical of Israel. So he's going to go after the weakest of them, who will be foreign students who are here on student visas. So he's going to do something nasty, like deport all of them or something like that. The domestic and transatlantic consensus around Israel will crack even under Trump more than under Kamala Harris. She might have people in her department who will care about Europe. Trump does not. So, so he will become so much more pro-Israel, at least in rhetoric, that European leaders will not be able to support that, even in France, even if Macron continues. So there will be, I think, a bigger crack between Europe and the US. So the transatlantic consensus, which is already weakened, will weaken further. It is quite possible that countries like Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia may improve their relations with the United States in a bilateral fashion. And there are all rumors now that Egypt may have bribed Donald Trump. We don't know, there is no evidence to that, but there are lots of suggestions. So I think for some of these countries like Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, see, all authoritarian leaders would rather have somebody like Donald Trump in White House than a Democrat. So even if you have a profoundly useless Democrat like Joe Biden when it comes to democracy, there are other people who will be there in the State Department who care about democracy and rule of law. The kind of people who will be working in important positions as ambassadors, etc., will be people who care about democracy, and they will make things tougher for authoritarian states. But under Donald Trump, the kind of people who will come in will be profoundly racist and also not very. I mean, they won't care about democracy at home, and they won't care about democracy at work. After what Donald Trump did on January 6th, anybody who cares about democracy would not be able to work with Donald Trump. So I think all authoritarian leaders everywhere in the world will be far more happier, especially in the Middle East. There is a huge democracy deficit in the Middle East. So you can bet that many of these dictators and monarchs will be quite happy with Donald Trump in the White House. And there will be no hope for the two-state solution. I think one of the worst things that might happen is that Donald Trump's son-in-law will probably be selling apartments on the beaches in Gaza after killing more people and occupying land. So I'm going to stop with that, and I'll be happy to take questions from your students and from your participants. I'm going to stop sharing this.